Hello, I'm Evan with Which Game First, a board game podcast, and I am joined by a very, very special guest today, Elizabeth Hargrave, game designer. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Good. It's a lovely Sunday morning in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it is a nice fall morning, so thank you so much for being with me this morning. So let's go right to it. The Fox Experiment is your latest and greatest game, currently on Kickstarter. My first question for you is, what led you to design a game based on the famous silver fox domestication experiments?
I heard about the experiment. I don't even remember where. Maybe I know there's a Radiolab episode about it, and so it may have been that. And I just started thinking about how cool it would be to have a game where you somehow can actually record the results of a die roll in a way that you incorporate it in to the next round of a game. So like breeding foxes, making a baby fox, and somehow having that baby fox be an actual card in the game that you can then draft later. So that's something that has been sort of the core mechanic in the Fox Experiment from the very, very beginning, because that was sort of the mechanical inspiration that went along with like, oh my God, this actual experiment in real life is like an amazing story that would be really fun for people to learn about.
That is, and in watching some of the videos about that have been produced so far about how the game is played, that is definitely one of the major features of this game, is that the players are going to be breeding the foxes and effectively creating the new next generation of cards that gets played, filling in even so much as the names of the actual animals that gets produced, and that's a real fun feature when it comes to games. Anytime the player is allowed to have that additional level of input, in a sense, into the game. So a very, very nice feature there. Now you must.
Oh, go ahead.
No, tell me.
You say it's when people first started talking about the Fox Experiment and sort of seeing the description, they were like, oh, this is a roll and write game, but it's sort of using roll and write materials. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we have figured out how to make cards that you can write on with a dry erase marker in the board game industry, sort of taking advantage of those materials. But the mechanics of the game, I think, will feel much more like a larger Euro game to a lot of people. But then it has this element of dry erase in it.
No, it's a nice blend, and there is certainly a lot going on in the game. For the game itself, you've had apparently this idea for a decent amount of time, at least going from the original concept to what is now, the prototype and the Kickstarter. So how long have you been working on this?
It's hard to count because there were times that I just wasn't working on it at all. I think I started working on it probably in 2019. I want to say, maybe even longer ago than that. I should know. I should look that up. But well, no, it must have been earlier. I had it at a playtesting convention at Unpub in Baltimore in early 2019, and it was half-baked, definitely not at a stage that I would have pitched it, but at the time John Gilmore was working for Pandasaurus Games, and he sort of saw it and said, I want to work on this with you. So that's how it ended up with Pandasaurus. So I must have been working on it even before then. So it's been a few years.
Yeah.
But with breaks, for sure.
Absolutely. And what was the biggest challenge? What do you think the biggest challenge was in designing the Fox Experiment?
I always had a mechanic where you're gathering dice based on the parent foxes, and then rolling them to pass the traits down to the baby foxes. And for a while I had but figuring out the exact right way to do that was probably the hardest part. So for a while I had it that you were sort of if you rolled even, then the mother's left hand, there were traits on different sides of the fox, and even or odd or high or low determined which traits passed down. And some people just found that really hard to parse. And that was just with normal D6s. And so then we went from that to like roll a bunch of D6s and add the numbers up, and that determines what your babies get. But there's just too much variance. If you're rolling a bunch of D6s, if you roll 10 D6s, you could roll a 6 or you could roll a 60, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Way too big. And so we landed on these dice with symbols on them that are basically like they range from 1 to 3 in value, but also it matters how you can match them up with each other, and some of them are wild. And so there's like, and now it became a very interesting little mini puzzle within the game, how you solve the dice. And that just felt great. So we finally landed on the right place. And that was mostly my co-designer, Jeff Frazier, who came up with that. Actually, as he was hired as a developer by Pandasaurus, and because he came up with that dice system, I was like, your name's going on the box.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's clever because in the game, like you said, you're allowed to, you can string your dice together, and you have a half of a symbol on one die and another half on another die, or the wild die, the one that links them together. It's really a great concept, and not something you see regularly at all in games that involve dice. So we're definitely looking at something very, very special there, and again, another fun aspect for the players.
I think this happens a lot in game design. It was a case where it was a new mechanic that didn't really arise because we were being spontaneously creative, but it came out of trying to solve a problem in the game design, and then like this cool new thing emerged from that.
Sounds like science to me. Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the relationship, in a sense, between board gaming and science. Now, board gaming, obviously, it's a leisure activity. The main purpose for people is to have fun. But when it comes to science-themed board gaming, does education take over as the primary goal, or at least being as important as people basically enjoying the game?
I think it depends on the designer and the publisher. Like the games that Genius Games put out, I think that is sort of their philosophy, that they want them really like usable in a classroom, and that they're teaching, and they need to be fun, because you're never going to teach anybody anything if they don't want to play the game. Mm-hmm. My approach has always been that I want a good game first. And I make games about things I'm interested in, and I'm interested in the natural world and science, and I want the information in the game to be not wrong. Mm-hmm. And I want it to teach people something, but kind of in passing. Like, I think most of my games wouldn't be as obvious as like, oh, I would pick this to teach people in a classroom setting about this subject. But it's certainly the case that with most of my games, you're going to play them and come away knowing something you didn't know before about whatever the subject is.
So in a way, you've sort of answered what my follow-up question to that was going to be, and that has to do with straying from sort of the purity of science and the scientific method itself, and the amount of latitude you have to have. Obviously, not every board game is a science class. It's not meant to be a substitute for that level of education. But at the same time, there are certain levels that you can be comfortable with, in which you allow yourself a certain latitude to, say, stray from the science itself. And I would assume that you have to have that sort of flexibility in order to achieve that balance.
Yeah, and it can be really hard to figure out where the right line is sometimes. With the Wingspan birds, all of the habitat and food information on the cards is more or less accurate, but it's very abstracted. Like, there are far more than 3 types of habitat in the world, and like whether a specific biome fits as like a grassland biome or not, like I just have to kind of shove things where I can sometimes, and sometimes I do sort of fudge around the edges because I want a particular ratio of habitats and foods in the deck, and so I'm like, oh, I can kind of make this bird a grassland bird as well as a wetland bird or not, or those sorts of things. So it's, you know, and like I said before, my sort of gut thing is that I just want them to not be wrong. I don't want someone to look at it and be like, oh, no, like that is impossible that bird would ever be in the grassland.
Avoid the major faux pas.
Right? But there's a lot of gray area in the middle that you can sort of wave your hands around. And at the level of a board game, you just have to, because you can't simulate the complexity that's out there in the world.
No.
The foxes in the Fox experiment, right? We're talking about 4 sort of physical traits that emerged in the foxes. But there are hundreds of genes that are contributing to those 4 traits, and like you can't simulate that. You just have to wave your hands, and and it has to. In the end, it has to be fun.
And as long as you're driving home sort of the general main concepts of passing on traits from generation to the next generation, that seems to satisfy the main concept that the game is trying to bring home, and I think it successfully actually does that very well.
Yeah, and the other really main concept from that experiment that I wanted to make sure came through is that they were really, in the game you get to pick foxes based on all of the traits on their cards, but in the actual experiment they were really only picking on the personality of the foxes, and there's all this biochemical stuff with like serotonin that's happening where the personality of the foxes is actually partly is directly linked to those physical traits showing up because of the biochemistry of the personality and how that same biochemistry affects the emergence of physical characteristics. And so the way that we sort of made a nod to that in the dice mechanics is that there are these wild dice that we call the friendly dice that are, so those you want because they're adding to all of your different traits, however you decide to make them add it. So I wanted to make sure that it was clear that it was not the traits being passed down in the way that we learned in biology class in school, where like you have the pea planets and I forget what the different characteristics were, you know, they're short or tall, and
the Mendel experiments,
because that's not what happened in this experiment. What they figured out is that it's way more complicated than that, and that's really cool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. When you read more about the Silver Fox experiment, it really draws you in, and the results are just fascinating.
Yeah.
In science in general, experiments are often more likely to go wrong than right, and errors become apparent as these experiments unfold. Do you find that there is a parallel with that part of the scientific process and the process of game design?
That's a really good question. Probably. Yeah. I mean, one of my pieces of advice that I always give to new game designers or people that are sort of design curious is just know that your first draft of any game will be terrible. Like, if you, like, my advice is always just make something and get it on the table and figure out the ways in which it is terrible, because then you can fix them. And that probably is very similar to, like, I want to explore this scientific area. I'm just going to test some stuff out. Oh, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? How do I fix it? Yeah, there probably are a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, I've definitely seen them over my time, and I don't think you could ever find a game designer who could say, my initial ideas here found their way all the way to the very end product, and they had to make very few changes along the way. So no doubt about that. Now, the Fox Experiment board game, it's in the Kickstarter campaign right now. It's been very successful so far, and there's still a few days left for people to join and back this project. A lot of the stretch goals have already been reached. There's a new stretch goal, another stretch goal in line that is on the target. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Do you have that up in front of you?
I haven't looked this morning at where we're at. I was out all day yesterday.
Third Fox Meeple design, player 6.
Oh, yeah. So this has actually been something that's been getting a lot of commentary on the Kickstarter. So there are a lot of different Fox Meeple options in this game. And so the retail version comes with adorable little wooden meeples. And some people are very happy with those. And then a lot of the stretch goals have been around these really cool plastic screen printed or heat transferred player pieces that have actual Fox art on them. So some of the art from the cards they're actually putting on little standees that are little foxes in the different player colors. So you've been working all the way through all the different players, all the way up through 6 players. And it looks like we are about to hit the last Fox Meeple goal. And I know we have been talking about a couple more stretch goals after that. So, yeah, there's definitely more to come once that one gets unlocked. And it'll be a little bit more content for the game.
That is exciting. So happy with the success of this project so far. And I want to wrap up with one more question for you. I hear that you're designing a game about mushroom collection. Is that true?
Not about mushroom collection, about the fact that mushrooms and trees transfer or trade nutrients. So the mycorrhizal sort of symbiotic relationship between mushrooms and trees. So in the game, you're actually playing from the point of view of a Douglas fir tree, trying to get your seedlings sort of out and established in the world. And
this is a passion of yours, a hobby, something you're also very much interested in, is the world of mushrooms.
I am actually the president of the Mycological Association of Washington.
Hey.
I'm a big mushroom fan. For sure.
Oh my gosh! So absolutely.
And that system is just another, like, a lot of people don't know that exists, that like mushrooms and trees interact and have their roots sort of attached to each other.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. There's
stuff going on that's like, is there agency in some of this system? Like, they're finding out that that the carbon that trees put out into the network of mushrooms, some of that gets absorbed by other trees that are also attached to the same fungal network. And they've been finding that the carbon that goes out will get somehow preferentially absorbed by the offspring that are related to the tree that put that carbon into this network.
Wow.
Like, how does that happen? They don't know.
That's fascinating, and I know my
how would the tree send it to their offspring? We don't know.
Oh my gosh, my co-hosts on my science podcast would be thrilled to talk to you some more about that at a future date. That would be fantastic. That's great, Elizabeth. Congratulations again on another successful game. I look forward also to your future games and everything else you've got coming up.